Welcome to the Wine Society's Book and Bottle Club, an opportunity for members to hear directly from an author about a recent book launch, as well as some wines with a story to tell. For this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Felicity Cloake, award-winning writer behind The Guardian's How to Cook the Perfect Recipe column and author of 3 books, One More Croissant for the Road, Red Sauce, Brown Sauce. And today we're going to be talking about her latest book, Peach Street to Lobster Lane, which is available now and describes an incredible culinary road trip across America. What struck me about the book, I've just finished reading it, is just how much heart there is behind the food, people, places, the unexpected generosity that came across the trip. And Felicity has captured, I guess, an America that is more emotional and much deeper and richer than clichés may suggest. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation today with Felicity. So welcome, Felicity.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming along. First question is, why did you think this book needed writing?
Well, I've always loved, so a little bit of background, my first 2 travel books, the first one I cycled around France, writing about French food and sort of exploring regional French classics. The second one, I did the same for the UK, but based around the medium of breakfast, because, you know, if we do one thing well culinarily, it's breakfast. I mean, even the French would acknowledge that. And for the third one, I was sort of torn. Should I go to Italy? Should I go to Spain? They all felt very well-trodden paths by British writers, whereas the US, we have this strange push-pull relationship with it. We're both very snooty about it. I think it's the one country that actually people feel very comfortable being quite rude about their food in a way that we wouldn't anymore about, say, Finnish food. If you say anything about American food, people are like, oh, it's all fast food, it's all disgusting, it's all huge portions. And I thought there has to be more to it than that. I mean, there's countless hundreds of millions of people in this country. They don't just eat fast food. And number 2, it's just something that has not been written about in that way. A little bit, but it tends to be, again, the clichés. It tends to be, you know, fast food nation and things like that. And I just wanted to get under the skin of the country. And I've always felt very drawn to the States. It's a country that I think we see so much on film and on the small screen, and it has that romance to it, you know, that idea of the wide open spaces, and I thought that just looks like a great country for cycling. As it turned out, I was the only person that thought it was a great country for cycling, but I just thought it was a really exciting opportunity to get under the skin of a country that I'd visited quite a few times, but it's so vast that I hadn't really it felt like I hadn't scratched the surface. So I thought, yeah, 2 birds with 1 stone.
Excellent. And so your trips kicked off in California, in San Francisco. What did the first days in California teach you about the kind of scale and the possibilities of the trip ahead?
Well, number 1, even before I got there, so I was meant to spend quite a few days in San Francisco, which is where I flew out to. I was quite constrained. I would love to have started further up and gone to Oregon in particular. I'm a big fan of you know Oregon Rieslings and things like that. So that would have been great. Unfortunately, I was flying my bike out with me, and so airline routes meant that I had to go to San Francisco. So I wanted to do everything properly. It took such a long time that I ended up with just 3 days in San Francisco. So I really had to sort of race around. And I realised what a foolish mission it was to try and encompass the food of, you know, one of America's great food cities into 3 days. Because you might think, San Francisco, maybe you'd think sourdough bread, that's the thing potentially it's most famous for, and those sort of fisherman's chowders that you get on Fisherman's Wharf in the bread bowl. But apart from that, it was the first Chinatown in the States, and actually the Chinese American population have been there for a lot longer than, even than sourdough, because they came for the gold rush in the late 1840s, and there were already Chinese restaurants in when San Francisco was basically 2 streets and, dirt roads. And so I wanted to explore Chinese American food through that. There's also home of the famous Mission burrito, which is a very large burrito that was born in San Francisco. The farm-to-table movement that has since spread over the world is from Alice Waters in Berkeley. So there was so much to see. And I started to feel quite panicky because I got there and I thought, even on my first stop, how am I going to fit all of this in and tell a fair story about this? So yes, that gave me pause for thought. And then I was also quite worried. So I did cycle a bit around San Francisco, but I just knew at some point I was going to have to start off on my journey and get on my bike on the proper roads. And I was terrified about that because people had warned me. They said it's not a country for cycling, you're going to get killed, you're going to get squashed. And so that first morning when I set off down the Pacific Coast Highway south, I was incredibly nervous. And then, 10, 15 minutes, I thought, cycling is the same wherever you are. That's the lovely thing about it. You can be, I was in Taiwan cycling early last year, and that was basically the same as cycling in the States. It's, once you're on 2 wheels, is that lovely familiar thing. So once I was on the bike, I felt fine, but also I realised how large America is. I mean, I only covered a tiny bit of the Pacific Coast Highway, and it still took me, I think, about 2 weeks.
And I'm not surprised you were nervous, because the beginning of the book is full of messages from family and friends that are basically saying, try to convince Felicity that cycling in America is a bad idea.
Yes, I had some opposition, both from people at home, but also from Americans that live in California, saying no one cycles here, it's incredibly dangerous. And one of them, who was a friend of a friend who actually I ended up staying with in Beverly Hills in their pool house, which was very swanky, but because he couldn't convince me that it was a bad idea, he then sent emails to our mutual friends with sort of all caps, please dissuade her from this, and would send me cuttings from newspapers about cyclist deaths. And I'm so glad, he meant well, but I'm so glad that I didn't end up listening to him, because I found out it's a brilliant place to cycle.
And why did you choose to cycle? What perspective do you think that gave to you that other transport probably wouldn't have given to you?
I chose to cycle firstly because that's the format of the 2 other books I'd done, so most straightforwardly because I wanted to, replicate that journey. But also in the States particularly, when I've travelled there before, it's the classic road trip, but you're in a car, and a car is, although it enables you to cover great distances and to be very independent, you're so disconnected from the world around you. And even I did a little bit, quite a few train journeys on this as well, from between the different regions. And even then you're chatting to people, you're getting a sense of the communities you're passing through, you're going through the suburbs of those places, the industrial areas. In a car, I can say from experience, you're just on the freeways, you're only seeing, the verges, the signs, you're not seeing the communities. On a bike, people talk to you, particularly in the States. People thought clearly that I was mad, and more than any other country, they stopped to ask me what I was doing, where I was going, if I was safe, offer me advice. There was that curiosity that I think it opened up the States to me in a way that I really wasn't expecting. People aren't in any way intimidated by you when you're on a bike. It meant I could blend in. So for example, when I was in LA, I'd be cycling through places that people would say, oh, they're so dangerous, I wouldn't walk through there. On a bike, people don't give you a second glance, because I think in the States they assume that you're probably down on your luck as well because you're not in a car. And you just feel, I think, very approachable on a bike. And that really worked out for me well on this trip, because one of the things I love most about Americans is they love to talk. They're not shy about asking questions. So I had so many fascinating chats with people because of the bike.
Absolutely. So the first wine that you've chosen is a Californian wine.
Yes.
And we've got Clay Creek California Pinot Noir here. Why did you choose this?
Most simply because it sort of marked the start of my journey, because it's from relatively close to the Bay Area. I love Pinot Noir. I love that it feels that, I know it's not a New World grape, but it feels very much, in the expressions that you get there, just very, very sort of light-hearted and sort of, not formal as a style. And that really mirrors what I thought about American cuisine in general. You can get some very technically complex food there, but there's often a lightness of touch that is different from the way that you would get that cuisine presented in, say, France. And this, to me, felt like that.
I mean, California makes great Pinot Noir, and across every price point, and this is a quite affordable Californian Pinot, and I agree with you, it's just so, it's evocative, it's easy to drink, it's soft on tannins, and actually remarkable that it has that Pinot Noir character at this price point. So cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. Very nice.
The thing also that I didn't know when I chose this was that it really, the first thing that it made me think of was actually mulberries. And later in my trip, I could not move for mulberries. Later in the season, when I was in the Midwest, my tyres were carpeted in mulberries. I was having mulberry juice splattered up my legs because there are so many mulberry trees there and no one seems to pick them. I mean, I've got a mulberry tree near me in London, and unless you get there at dawn on the day they ripen, all the local Turkish ladies come and take them and make delicious things with them, no doubt. Whereas in the States, no one seems to care about them. So I was like, that is very apt.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that, when I was reading your book, I started making a list, actually, because I was absolutely blown away by just how many, well, I've written down as all-American foods. I think maybe you call them all-American foods. And there's about 25, 30 different American-influenced foods. Of course, I was expecting the hamburger, the pizza, and the interpretation of pizzas. What was the food that really kind of, I guess, surprised you the most?
I think it was that we're very used to seeing things that you've mentioned, like hot dogs or hamburgers or pizzas, European foods that have been changed by the American environment. But what I wasn't expecting, probably naively, was the foods that have emerged from subsequent waves of immigration to the States. And so, for example, when I was in Houston has a really big Asian American population, or Southeast Asian American population, and they have one of the specialities that actually you get all over the Gulf Coast is crawfish boils, which are a very sort of southern tradition. You know, you get your family round, you get several pounds of crayfish and you dump them in a massive pot with seasoning and aromatics, and you all sit around and eat with your hands and drink beer. But the Vietnamese American population and the Cambodians have got their own tradition now, and they put in spices from their own, their native cuisines. And this is a huge thing that you go, a family reunion, friends reunion. And I thought, that's so interesting. That's not something that I would have thought of as typically Southern, but it's as Southern as, say, gumbo or anything like that. And it's these new fusions that found to me really exciting. It was, again, when I was in Texas, I went to a restaurant that was a Taiwanese American chef who had grown up eating Tex Mex food because she'd grown up in San Antonio, but she also had her Taiwanese heritage, and so her food displayed sort of Mexican, American, Texan, and Taiwanese, and it was so exciting to eat, and it's something that you could find nowhere else in the world. So that was the thing that I didn't expect to find. I knew about the hot dogs. I didn't know about the breakfast burrito gyoza. They were surprised.
So from San Francisco, you head down south to Santa Barbara, where you had one of your most sort of joy-filled human moments or meals as such. Why don't you talk us through that? So
I was I ended up, the Pacific Coast Highway at that point was closed just south of Santa Cruz. It's just reopened earlier this year.
You're going to have to go back and do it again then, aren't you? Because it's such an amazing...
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. So I ended up I could cycle as far as Santa Cruz, then I had to go and land via Salinas, which John Steinbeck fans will know as the place that he wrote a lot about, which was very interesting because that's the agricultural beating heart of California, and it allowed me to see the endless sort of artichoke fields, strawberry fields, a really excellent Mexican food there, perhaps unsurprisingly given a lot of the labour in the fields is Mexican. And then I had to take a train down to Santa Barbara. So I arrived in Santa Barbara. I was absolutely exhausted after a day on the train looking at all of these landscapes I wanted to be cycling through. And Santa Barbara is a very sort of palm-lined ocean. You know, it's California as you imagine it in your wildest dreams. It's, you know, it's a Beach Boys song. And it's also very expensive. And so I walked through from the train, sort of looking scruffy with my bike, all of these swanky restaurants and people in, you know, very Californian sort of, you know, tight dresses and tight shirts and etc. And I thought, that sounds nice. I was staying in a hostel, youth hostel, and I said to the people at the desk, you know, is there something that I can eat nearby? And they were like, oh, well, you know, there's this restaurant and that restaurant. I ended up going to a Mexican supermarket, and it was just extraordinary. I picked up a picnic of all the fresh food I could find because, you know, the produce there was really great. Huge strawberries, amazing guacamole that I got, and tortilla chips that I got from the restaurant next door. And I went back to the hostel, and I sat and had this slightly strange picnic of, you know, California produce and Mexican food. And there was a couple of guys that were watching Men in Black in ear-splitting volume in the hostel kitchen. And I just thought, is this the California dream? I don't know. It was an unusual experience. But the next morning I went to the farmer's market and had some, you know, great conversations with the local producers. And I just thought, this is a side that we often don't see about America, how great the produce is. And yes, there are no doubt some of those strawberries were genetically modified, and there's a reason that we don't see, but they did taste great, I have to say. But at the farmer's market, it was all organic. It was just lovely things. And the care in which I bought an avocado from quite an elderly lady who was standing with this huge supermarket trolley full of avocados from her land. And she went through them all. She said, when are you going to eat it? And I said, well, I'm going to have it for breakfast. She said, she went through them all to find the ripest avocado for me. And it was just so lovely. I thought, you know, that's the side of it. There's the glamour and the restaurants and the palm trees. And then there's some, you know, it is one of the most fertile places in the world. And that's why it makes such great wine, I guess.
Absolutely. And you picked our next wine, which is the Santa Barbara Chardonnay, Exhibition Santa Barbara Chardonnay, made by Fess Parker for the Wine Society. It's got a combination, this part of California. I remember when I first went there to buy wine many years ago for the Wine Society, and what struck me was actually in California, the further south you go, the cooler it becomes, and it becomes cooler because there's a break in the mountain range. So the fog that comes off the Pacific Ocean actually gets sucked into the vineyards, which keeps those vineyards really cool up until about lunchtime. So you've got the sun and a more moderate temperature, so you get ripeness with this lovely freshness too. And of course with a bit of oak, but well judged oak in a sort of California style.
Yeah, smelling this really made me think of how much fresh produce there were. Kind of, I was getting really ripe melons and a little bit of pineapple maybe there, and I just thought it's very that abundance in the glass, but as you say, with a little bit of sort of savoury backbone for me, which, you know, tempers that. And I did cycle through quite a lot of fog, so
yes, yeah. No, it's nicely controlled wine. So from California, you start heading east inland, and we're going to cover Texas in a moment. But I do want to just talk about the hamburger because in your book you kind of wrestle a little bit with, well, what is a hamburger? Is it a sandwich, or is it something that is there something unique that makes it a hamburger rather than a sandwich?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the great questions of our age is a hamburger a sandwich? And it's important in the book because lots of people lay claim to having invented the hamburger. This sort of popular notion that actually it's a German creation that travelled is not really borne out by the evidence. There was something called a Hamburg steak, which is kind of like a French steak haché, just plain minced beef. But actually, that wasn't a particularly German thing. You find it in lots of British cookery books at the time, and etc. And so it was really, the hamburger seems to be the first person that put a minced beef patty in a sandwich as a handheld item. And the reason that's important is that it makes it really quintessentially American, because it was born out of this automobile culture, because you want something that is, American society speeded up much faster than, say, European society because cars were so popular so early. And so it became important who did this first. And there's two, I would say, people that really have a proper claim to it. First is a place called Louis' Lunch in New Haven, Connecticut, which you can still go to. They still use the original broilers for the hamburgers, but importantly, and the burger is really good. I would advise anyone in New Haven to go and to also get a New Haven pizza while you're there. But it's served between 2 slices of white bread. And although good, once you get to the second half, the bread is so soggy, there is no way you could eat that behind the wheel of a car. Whereas the second claim, which is by the founder of a small chain called White Castle, which is still big in the Midwest but is largely unknown elsewhere, he was the first person to develop a bun to go with the hamburger. And that, I think, is where the hamburger as we know it was born. And that was in the 1920s. And it is so interesting to me how the hamburger, which is probably, I think, the most well-known symbol of American cuisine around the world, also ties into so many other quintessentially American things like, the freeways, the fast food, the efficiency, the standardization. All of this is born out of one little beef sandwich, essentially, from the Midwest. And I just thought telling that story told us a lot about why American food and American culture has developed as it has.
Exactly. The other thing that surprised me were there were some places you went to where it was banned to put ketchup in.
Yes.
Which I thought was really fascinating too.
Yes, there are a few places that if you asked for ketchup, they would just say, go to McDonald's down the road. It's interesting. One of the things that I find most exciting about American food, and which surprised me, was this idea that unlike older food cultures, and I say that only because there's so little trace of Native American food culture left, that clearly there were, people there before the Europeans arrived and they had a very complex food culture of their own, but it's largely been erased, sadly. So unlike people with older extant food cultures where tradition is very important and authenticity and rules, I think particularly places like Italy, are important. In America, although people will say this is my nonna's recipe and it's important, also there's a freedom. People feel happy to play around with things, to experiment. There's a sense of fun about it. But then occasionally you come up against these rules, like you must never put ketchup on a hot dog in Chicago, otherwise you'll be chucked out of the thing. You should, there's various other ones about what you put on pizza. Barbecue, of course, is a huge thing. If you have a mop, if you have dry barbecue, etc. And these things are very jealously guarded. If you put beans in a chili, that's in Texas, that's unknown. So it is interesting to me that even though there's this laissez-faire attitude, for a few things, they're very strict.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You then spent some time in Texas, which is not a place one would normally associate with cuisine or wine. So tell us a bit more about what you came across in Texas.
So this was my first visit to Texas. I'd been to the States a lot before, but I just never happened to Texas. I thought Texas felt a little bit, I knew that Texas was famous for its barbecue, and I knew about Tex Mex, but I thought it was just going to be all meat and Stetsons, basically. And when I got there, it started off, so you can take a train from LA to San Antonio, which is an amazing 2-day trip through the southwestern desert. When I got to San Antonio, number one, after LA, it felt more like a European city. I sort of felt almost at home there, which was lovely. It was a very walkable city. And number two, the complexity of the cuisines really surprised me. And as I said, there was, this Taiwanese, there were, I went to a restaurant where There were a couple of guys doing Texas barbecue, so things like brisket, but in Thai curry sauces. There was so much more to it than Tex Mex. But the Tex Mex was extraordinary. And anyone that thinks they know Tex Mex because, they've had a chimichanga somewhere, really go to San Antonio and eat the real stuff. It's so good. And it's, the cucina povera of southwestern US. And it deserves, I think, a bit more respect.
What makes Tex Mex then?
So it's a focus on... So Texas was actually part of what is now Mexico before it was part of the States. So it's got a really long... history. Tex-Mex, as opposed to southern or Mexican now food, tends to be characterised by fewer ingredients and certainly fewer spices, because it is a region of huge grasslands and just quite underpopulated. So it tends to be plainer, tends to be more meat focused, because actually a lot of Texans were originally sort of worked in the cattle industry and were cowboys and etc. So lots of meat, fewer spices, just plainer food, but very good, done well. It's great, it really is. It's just, you don't get those sort of complex mole sauces and things up there, but it's just lots of barbecued meat and incredible salsas, and it's very good.
Fantastic. And so the next wine that you picked actually is a Rioja. So where's the connection?
So what I didn't expect I knew I was going to get Tex-Mex. What I didn't expect to get in Texas was Texas wine. And there's, in downtown San Antonio, there's something called an urban winery. And I have to say, I went in there a little bit snootily, thinking that this was going to be, really overcooked, because Texas is a pretty hot place, really overcooked, jammy, unpleasant wine. And I got talking to the owner, who's a sommelier, who said that she'd come from Chicago, where she'd been a sommelier in some really excellent restaurants. She said before she'd moved, she'd also had the same impression. And then she got there and realised that actually Texas has some, Texas Hill Country has some real cool climate vineyards, or cooler climate vineyards. And she said this is one of the best places in the world to make Rioja style wines. And I don't know whether it was the amount of wine she fed us, but by the end of the evening, I was sort of, where can I buy this? Does anyone export it? And she said, to be honest, the reason that you don't see it on wine lists, even elsewhere in the States, is because Texans love to drink their own wine, and so very little gets outside the state. But it really was worth visiting, and it opened my eyes, my snooty European eyes.
Well, the Wine Society might need to do a bit of a trip there then, actually, because we don't list the Texan wine. I think occasionally we've come across them, but not, I don't think, a Texan Tempranillo. So who knows? Look out for on our list for the future. One may appear. But this is a real classic Rioja we've got in our glass here, a Crianza called Finca San Martin, which is 100% Tempranillo. Most Rioja is a blend with Tempranillo taking the lead, but this is made in a real traditional Rioja way, so quite long aging in American oak, which is very much the kind of signature of Rioja as we know it today, which gives it a lovely kind of slightly creamy, mellow, vanilla kind of character to it. And actually a wine that would probably stand up to some of that Texan food, actually. Not bad, is it?
It smells like it could do well with some grilled meat.
Yes. Tell us about your pizza discoveries, because, there are all sorts of varied, and we know that there are varied influences in Italy itself, but America has sort of taken its own interpretation across different states.
Yeah, one of the things that I found very interesting was that I was aware of the Chicago deep dish pizza, but I didn't realise how many different regional styles of pizza America has. I mean, I think I've got a list in my book that's probably about 15, but that was not exhaustive, because some you think, oh, that sounds very much like another one. But things like when I was in Chicago, so I had the deep dish pizza, but when I spoke to locals, they said, oh, it's not a tourist thing, but it's something that we would probably have maybe once a year, Whereas they have something called a tavern-style pizza, which is almost like a cracker. It's very thin and crispy. It tends to be served in rectangles, and it's something that's designed that you can pick it up, beer in one hand, pizza in the other, and eat like that. So it's kind of a bar food. And then they also have a stuffed pizza, which is kind of like a deep dish, but with a homeopathically thin top crust, which is said to be based on an Italian traditional Easter pie. And then they have something called a pizza puff, which is sort of like a fast food type. There's so many, even within Chicago. And I was fascinated by this because actually even in Italy, you don't really find, you've got Neapolitan pizza and you've got Roman pizza and a few others, but in general, pizza is acknowledged as a kind of southern speciality and sort of very southwestern speciality. Whereas in the States, because Italians came from so many different places, actually it's proliferated, and it gave me so much joy to realise that it didn't matter that it wasn't trying to be a Neapolitan pizza, and yet it was still delicious. And to sort of shake off that slight snobbiness that I had that, nothing is measuring up to the Neapolitan style. It's not authentic and it doesn't care, it's delicious.
Yeah, it does its own thing.
And so when you sitting here now looking back at your whole trip, what was the big learning for you around food? What is your big takeout from the whole trip?
I think firstly that American food is so much more diverse than we give it credit for, and I think even actually than a lot of Americans give it credit for, because again and again talking to people, they're very aware of the good food within their own city, within their own state, but they maybe haven't travelled as widely in America as they might have done, say, in Europe. And so they can be a little bit dismissive. So that certainly, that there's much more to it than this fast food. But also that America, one thing that surprised me that I don't think that I would have discovered had I been in a car, in fact, I know I wouldn't have discovered, was that the big chains that we see here that represent American food to us, of course, they're huge presences, but they are clustered on the freeways and the freeway exits. If you're on a bike, you really rarely come across them. So by the end, I was thinking, I haven't eaten in, say, an American McDonald's or anything like that, because I just never saw them. And there's a really vibrant culture of sort of mom and pop diners and independent Chinese restaurants and etc. And American towns, because of the distance between them, their downtowns do tend to be quite vibrant places of independent businesses. Their opening hours are quite weird. You do need to eat dinner by 6 or everything's closed, but it's just a much richer and more exciting place to eat than I imagined. So I came away wanting to go back.
Yeah, fantastic. I think we all do now. Get on the bike. And so what's next for you in terms of writing, Felicity?
I've got my first novel coming out in May. Available to pre-order now. It's called The Underdog, and it's a very light-hearted rom-com that involves restaurants and restaurant critics and a dog. The dog is not the romantic lead, but he does play quite a big part. So yes, quite nerve-wracking, but also exciting.
Well, looking forward to seeing that and reading that, and hopefully a future Book and Bottle episode with that book too.
There is quite a lot of wine drunk.
Is there?
Yes.
Thanks so much, Felicity. It was a real pleasure to hear all of the stories that went behind your fantastic book, which is available for sale, and I wholeheartedly recommend that you go out and buy the book. It's a fantastic read. Our next episode of the Book and Bottle Club comes out in April.